Hey everybody, this is Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com here in San Diego, California for all things Vespa. If you have an older modern Vespa classic such as the CT4, if you have a vintage Vespa or a brand new Vespa, we got you covered on the web, ScooterWest.com, parts, accessories, we got it all. All right, let's jump into the subject of this video. Here we got a quote-unquote barn find vintage Vespa ET4. It's not really vintage yet. I don't know why I called it that, but pretty much any ET4 that's on the road is going to be over 15 years old because they haven't made them since 2005. And now they're at the ripe age where you'll find, unused, maybe neglected Vespa ET4s and LXs. And I want to go over whether this scooter is worth it as a project for you, or if you're going to bring it to a shop such as ours to fix up and get running. I'm going to go over all the different things you'd find on the scooter and what you'd want to do to refurbish it where it's in safe running order. And I hope this helps people out in general, because any other older scooters could be very similar. Scooters are all pretty much the same with the automatics. They're similar transmission, carbureted typically of this era, air-cooled engine, disc brake on the front. So I'll start kind of A to Z of everything I would do to this scooter if I was going to start riding it. Not necessarily cosmetic stuff, which is a rabbit hole a lot of customers jump down first as they end up buying cosmetic stuff. Like, oh, it's got a broken mirror. Let me buy a battery and a broken mirror. Well, replace the mirror, and a lot more to it to get something like this on the road again. As with any motor, you find an old lawnmower, it's going to need some work probably to get it back going again. So let's jump right into it, and I'll start with just the basic stuff that everybody overlooks when finding something such as this kind of scooter here. So hypothetically, the way you come across a scooter like this, maybe you're searching Craigslist, somebody's looking to clean out their garage or their backyard, have one up for $100. Two number one things I would look for before you even take possession of this scooter. It may look like a perfect scooter, but two very, very important things. First of all, I see no plate on this scooter. Or if it had a plate with some sort of expired tags on it or registration, the first thing you want to do is figure out what the status of the registration is. A lot of people oversee that. I have a lot of customers here in my service department. We'll do a full restoration and then they'll find out there's $1,000 of back registration fee. Every state has different laws pertaining to pulling a scooter back into operational state where it's fully registered. California's got very strict laws where you need to keep a vehicle registered every year, or you could pay a small fee, then non-op it, or put it in non-operational status. Unfortunately, most people don't pay that small fee, so you end up with an exorbitant number of back fees. And also look for liens on the vehicle, which is essentially somebody still owes a bank for the vehicle. Definitely want to check that. I don't care if you're just buying it for parts. You don't want to end up with a stolen vehicle or something that has major, major registration issues. So on a Vespa ET4, you'd find the engraved VIN underneath the seat. Sometimes there's a plate on the front if it's a newer scooter. Of course, you're going to need the keys to open up the seat, but you pull that up and right under here is the VIN number. And it's going to be a 17-digit number that's engraved into the frame. You could typically get in touch with your DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles agent in your county, state, local area to figure out what the registration status is. Especially if the customer does not have a title to sign over, any of the paperwork that goes with a scooter. Definitely worthwhile checking that out before you even consider purchasing a low price fixer-upper scooter like this. The second important thing you want to find out, other than the looks of it, is make sure it has keys with it. All the Vespa 150s sold in the United States have an immobilizer system. If you're missing the keys, you're going to need to replace the ignition tumblers, which is a rather difficult task, especially if the column is locked, such as like this. It's going to take quite a bit. But fortunately, this scooter had both keys, and they're the correct keys to the scooter. and hopefully correct electronically. It's pretty much when we power up the scooter, you could see if the code light, you can see it's got very low miles, but it's just been kind of left out to kind of rot away, unfortunately. But fortunately, we got the keys here, so we're good there. If you're missing the keys, you're going to need to replace the ignition box or have somebody recode the ignition system. It's something we do at our dealership, and I would want to have proof of ownership before we do something like that for you. Definitely more affordable than replacing the ignition components and the lock set, but we can certainly do that for you. You can search Scooter West for some of our specialized services that do that for you if you are missing the keys. But keep in mind, that's an added cost to fixing up one of these scooters. So typically with a scooter of this age that's been sitting around for a long time, the tires are going to be in pretty poor condition. So once you get the motor running, I would definitely count on putting new tires. If it's been stored outside on the side of the yard, even as little as 5 years of not, sitting outside, that's enough to rot away a tire where I feel it's unsafe and wouldn't use it regardless of how good the tread is. If it's been in a garage, I've seen tires over 10 years old, sometimes that are safe, but a general rule of thumb, if the tires are over 10 years old, I'd recommend replacing them. So it's April 2020 that I'm shooting the video. Let me show you how you'd find the date code on a tire. So you got a Continental tire here. This tire's been replaced, not original to this ET4. You're gonna look around on all the writing, and typically you'll see some mold release compound, and typically a 4-digit code. And if you're wondering how this code works, it's kind of upside down on camera, but it says 1810. So the way this code works, you got 52 weeks in a year. So if it's at 01, that'd be the first week of the year. This is the 18th week, so pretty much about 3 months into the year. And 10 is going to be 2010. So this tire's just over 10 years old here. So the first thing everybody wonders about a scooter that's been sitting, well, does it run? Let's find out, because we do have the keys. Wah, wah, wah. Nothing comes on at all. Pretty typical of a scooter that's been sitting 6 months or more. Oftentimes the battery will just go flat and self-discharge. This scooter has clearly been sitting for several years without use, so there's no chance the battery's probably going to come back. So I'll show you where the battery is located on something like an ET4 or a Vespa LX150. It's going to be located underneath the seat, and again, with the VIN, you need the key to get to it. Here's the battery compartment and one screw to access the battery. I can tell somebody put a brand new battery in this at one time. Sometimes they'll even have a date code on the battery. You can certainly see if there's any life in the battery, set the voltage. You don't need a fancy meter like this. You can get the cheapest little $10 meter, check a battery, put it in voltage mode. There's pretty much nothing in this battery. If it said there is 6 or 8 volts, there's a small chance it may come back. Most likely it's already been degraded. If it says 10 volts, it may come back. I'd give it a shot, put it on the charger. But this thing certainly is not coming back. So the first order of operations, and pretty much anybody with a scooter doesn't start, they think, okay, I need a battery. So go ahead and put one of these Piaggio PTX 12BS batteries. It's an affordable alternative to the name brand Yuasa battery, but they've been proven to be pretty good quality and reliable and give you a good life. Obviously a scooter that's used daily, I've seen batteries last as long as 7 years without issue, even longer in some cases. But on my personal bikes, they typically last a long time, but I do make an error and sometimes leave the battery on. These battery screws are really loose, so somebody was not very conscious when they installed it. Pretty important to have them tight. So pretty straightforward to change out, pull the old one out. Keep in mind these posts are lead, so you want to wash your hands after. That was a brand new battery, probably from AutoZone. I've done several videos in the past on how to change the batteries on every single Vespa model. I think there's one video that covers all the models in one video. And you usually get a little bag of screws that aren't installed in the battery. Obviously the battery is all the way charged up and filled with acid. If you buy it from our dealership, they're all ready to go and tested. Same with We do have these available on our website. They include all the stuff to prep it yourself, minus a charger. Our basic little NOCO charger or battery tender charger works perfect. So drop the battery in the same orientation. Make sure the key is off. And I can tell you one thing, I know the scooter's not gonna, it might crank over, but it's very unlikely to start being a carbureted older scooter. Even a fuel injected scooter, if it's sat for several years, it may have a clogged fuel system. So you got two terminals, you got the red, they do have a little plus on there, and you find the plus on the battery terminal. Start with the plus, a little safer, you could do either order, but typical with the cars, you do positive first. Make sure they're nice and tight. And a lot of times I'll just touch that, make sure there's no spark or a short. Sometimes I've had a surprise where the starter relay is stuck on one of these and then all of a sudden starts cranking when you connect it. Not likely, but I've seen that happen just in all the years of servicing these scooters. I'll probably leave the cover off because typically I test the charging system. Now let's see what happens with the scooter after we put the key in. So typically you'd want to separate these immobilizer keys, but it's hanging low. It should be fine. Let's see what happens. I do see the Piaggio code light flashing. That's a good sign. Let's turn it on. It should just blink once. Well, guess what? It's still blinking. The kill switch is in the run the off position. Let's see if it works. Okay, well that's a good sign. Oftentimes these buttons with age and being left outside, you see they're very chalky. The contacts are probably degraded in all these switches. If I was going to put this back in regular service, I'd probably replace all these switches. They're very inexpensive, all available on our website, scooterwest.com. But keep that in mind. Good news is I put it in run, I saw the Piaggio code light blink once. That means we're likely going to have a spark to start. Probably not going to have fuel because we have a clogged carburetor. You want to check the engine oil. Sometimes people park them, they'll take the oil out, but the oil indicator is working on the dash, which is a good thing. I'm going to pull one of the two brakes on, make sure brake light comes on, and see what happens when I push the start button. The motor sounds healthy. It's got compression. The oil light went out, which is a good sign, so it means it's circulating oil, but not likely to start. You can even give it a couple twists. No life in the, or attempt to start. So the next order of operations for some scooter like this is overhaul the carburetor. And I'll show you the components, but you can look at my other videos for a complete hour and 20 minutes on overhauling a carburetor. They're all pretty much the same on all these Vespas of this period. They call it a constant velocity carburetor, and it's located right underneath the seat, which is a beautiful thing on the Vespas, nice and easy to service. A couple other things on top of overhauling this dirty carburetor. Oftentimes the air filters are made of foam element. I would highly recommend ordering a replacement air filter element because oftentimes once you start the scooter, that foam is degraded and it will suck into the carburetor and engine, which is not a good thing. Another thing to check out is all these rubber hoses and the intake manifold. This intake manifold is made of rubber and this thing feels like a rock. It's very inexpensive to have a replacement intake manifold, a popular item that we sell. I don't see any cracks in there, but it'd definitely be the time to replace it, especially if you're putting this back in service. So in overhauling the carburetor can be as simple as just clean out with no parts to as complicated as needing a new choke, gaskets, which aren't available for this ET4 carburetor, or if it's got leaks. If this carburetor is too gone and completely clogged and looks like a green goo mess in there, I would just cut your losses and buy a brand new carburetor. The fortunate thing is you could still get a new carburetor for the scooter. It's not the original Walbro carburetor that's found in these ET4s. The Kian carburetor that's found in the LX 150 carbureted all the way up to 2009 will fit this model perfectly and it will run perfect because the engine architecture is nearly the same. You may be able to try some other carburetor, but your mileage may vary and it's unlikely to run very good. In addition to the intake manifold, all the hoses I would recommend doing. This is just standard automotive grade hoses for the evaporative emission system. I see a lot of people disconnect this stuff. I'm not going to go into that. I just recommend hooking it back up. It's very reliable on these models as long as you're not overfilling the gas tank. The one thing I would do is replace these lines. This line is like a rock, and it's not even the original line. It's like somebody's replaced it at one point. Typically it get routed through this little sleeve. So this is the fuel line. This is the vacuum line. This is 3.5 millimeter hose. We have the pre-cut lengths of fuel line. And the last item that's exposed to the fuel is going to be the fuel tap, which is located right under here. There's going to be a single flat screwdriver. You'll need probably a little short screwdriver. It loosens up a hose clamp, and I would recommend having a pan to catch the fuel underneath when you pull out and have some gloves on. Because I'll tell you, this fuel, you could do the sniff test. If you know what gasoline smells like, I hope you don't sniff it for a living or whatever. But normal gas has got that pungent, kind of just gasoline smell. I don't know how to explain it, but if you smell this, it smells more like paint varnish. And that's typical of fuel that's been degraded, especially the fuel sold in North America that has 10 to 15% ethanol in it. It really degrades in a short period of time. Even as short as 6 months, it will start to degrade and clog up carburetor components. So carburetor overhaul, intake manifold, all new hoses, and the fuel tap. Your cost on something like that, it would range anywhere from $50 if you're just going to do it yourself. Buy a new fuel tap, all the hoses, a float needle maybe just to have on hand for the carburetor, carburetor spray cleaner, and the intake manifold. That'd be the low range of the scale. The high range of the scale, you may be as high as $350 or so if you have to buy a brand new carburetor for this scooter. The carburetors are not cheap, but they are high quality, original, Japanese-made Kiin carburetors that give a very long service life as long as you don't let them clog up. So let's talk about the engine for a moment here. I can tell you one thing, it does sound healthy. When it cranks over, it has the distinct kind of cranking with compression noise. I don't need to do a compression check on it. Once you clean the carburetor, I feel it's likely going to idle and start and have plenty of power. But there are some things that do degrade with age and neglect. Underneath here is the belt cover. Obviously, you see this thing is in very poor condition. For the most part, that's all cosmetic. That's the powder coat finish. That's just completely corroded, or the moisture from being near the coastal environment has just degraded that, makes it look pretty ugly. You could repaint that part, sandblast it, and powder coat it, however far you want to take it. We'll check the engine oil. And you know, this tire's right at the wear limit and probably ancient if I look up the date code on it. May have low miles, but the tire is certainly worn out. Kind of gives you an indication. With that low miles, the miles may be suspect. It may have a broken speedometer cable or a different odometer. So kind of use that as a telltale. If you see really low miles and you got questionable tires, then I would wonder. Fortunately, somebody did change the oil. It's very clean and right at the top mark. The typical rule of thumb is change all the fluids anyways after 2 years. So once you have it running, we do know there's oil in there to make it safe to start, but sometimes you would take the dipstick out and you'll find more than oil in there. You may find gasoline mixed in with the oil, and that could be from a leaky fuel system, or even worse, if it's been outside, you may find water in the oil where it would have kind of a milkshake, foamy appearance. That's very bad news. There may be internal engine damage because those internal engine components shouldn't ever be exposed to water. It may have been in a flood. So something to check if you're gonna purchase something like this. Check the oil. If it's dark oil, it means it's kind of been neglected. If the dipstick comes out dry, it's definitely been neglected. If there's water in the motor oil, just run, or you better get the thing for free for parts for the next one you find. Same with this is the gearbox oil or the final drive, which does the final reduction of the transmission down to the speed. The oil looks really good in there, and it's right on the tip where it should be. Oftentimes you'll find that overflowed, but I've had a scooter or maybe 2 scooters from New Orleans, and I had a couple scooters even here in San Diego that have been exposed to floods. Bad news for the engine if it's been exposed to a flood. Once you get it going and you want to have this scooter nice and reliable, I would definitely recommend ordering one of our transmission overhaul kits. The main component that deteriorates from age is going to be la banda, the drive belt in there. The clutch is usually grungy, and there's going to be a dust buildup that causes some kind of poor performance. Just replace the rollers, inexpensive while you're in there. That's part of the transmission. You can watch plenty of my transmission videos on how you overhaul the transmission. Are pretty much all the same across the Vespa board for automatic Vespas. And the last thing for this age of scooter, I would overhaul the driven pulley, and I do have a video on how to do that. You do need some bigger, heavier duty tools or specialty tools to do that, or you can mail it to us and we can certainly do it for you. There's a pair of grease seals in there, and it's grease packed, and typically a scooter is 15 years or older, that grease is deteriorated and it's no longer going to do its job, or it's dried up. So you definitely want to do that for smooth transmission operation and long belt life. Other little things, oftentimes the center stands are heavily rusted, including the hinge. Sometimes you'll see the center stand will get stuck. May want to overhaul that part of it. Check the engine mounts. You know, it's nice and tight to the body. That's very important. Cosmetically, this thing's pretty beautiful. You know, the paint job is just, the corrosion's got to it. So pretty clear that you see this thing's been neglected, and on somebody's, you know, side of their house, there's lots of spider webs. Even as little as a month, you'll start getting spider webs building up. At least here in Southern California, I know the bugs vary depending on your region. You got the brake caliper. I bet the brake shoes are good, but I'll tell you one thing. When I pull the brake, it's got a kind of mushy, spongy feel. And that's probably because the brake fluid in this scooter is also 15 years old. The first thing I do is flush the brake fluid and check everything for leaks. You do not want to have brake fluid leaks because you can end up losing the braking on there. Another thing that's very common on a older modern Vespa or modern scooter is the grease in the forks. You know, this is a fork, so there's going to be a pair of bearings. I can tell you it feels pretty rough, and if you lift the scooter, it's very stiff. And that means these bearings that are both in the neck and at the top headset, the grease is degraded. And unfortunately, the services, or with any scooter, it's quite a labor-intensive job. You need to pull the handlebars off, loosen the ring nut and drop the whole entire fork, disconnect the hydraulic brake system, and you'd be able to grease that. And there's more bearings than just these fork bearings that typically degrade on this scooter. You want to check the wheel bearings. It's very, very stiff. And that may be a combination of the caliper dragging, but I certainly would not ride a scooter where it doesn't have a smooth spinning front tire. It may have the engine running, that's a dangerous situation. And there's an easy way to tell how the grease looks in the front end of one of these modern Vespas that has a mechanical speedometer cable. Obviously, the very new Vespas, 2015 and newer, they don't have a mechanical speedometer cable. They have a much more reliable electronic sender, but we're talking about getting something like this up on the road when you're on a budget and don't want the commitment of purchasing a brand new scooter. So in this hub, you know, which is behind the disc brake, there's grease that does a combination of things. It lubricates the wheel bearings. It also lubricates the mechanical speedometer drive and also the pivot for the fork. The bearings up in the front are completely sealed. They do fail, but they tend to be pretty reliable for a long time. We're going to go ahead and easily inspect this. We're not going to overhaul it in this video, but you want to remove this lower caliper mount because they sometimes have a little wire that retains the brake or the speedometer cable. See that little wire? That's the only reason I disconnected that. And then you take an 8mm socket. And ooh, that thing just broke right off. Look how much rust is in there. Well, there's some bad news right there. That's gonna take me an extra 15 minutes to drill that out and put a Healy coil in there. It's typical stuff you'll find on an old scooter that's been sitting out, especially if there's any corrosion or rust. So that broke right off. Bad news. It is possible to repair it or drill it out, but we'll pull the speedometer cable out. See how the grease, actually the grease feels pretty good. Turn this, you turn it I think it's counterclockwise. You can look at the speedometer needle and see if it just lifts off the 0 mph mark. That'll indicate whether the speedometer cable's broken. It doesn't pull. I think we're okay on the speedometer cable, but I bet you it only gets worse when we dig further into this hub. So once you got the rubber part that kind of bites the cable and seals it, there's going to be a metal spacer in there. And typically that's kind of stuck in there, and you can use a pick to pull it out. Or if you pull the whole entire fork apart, or the hub apart, you'd be able to easily push this out. So grease is in, you know, there's some hard grease in there. And the last thing to pull out is the speedometer drive gear. And you can use a needle nose in there. And it's not the worst I've seen. I think somebody's put new grease in this at one point. Because if it's never had grease, it will be a white, hard, plasticky substance. I can still feel a little bit of it in there. So kind of good news on that regard, and the gear still looks to be in good shape, but we still got to overhaul it and figure out why there's some binding on that front end. Likely either from the brake caliper or grease that is hardened in the hub. So let me go over price, because that's the most important aspect of an older scooter. Most people are buying a scooter that's older because of the value or the price of it. Well, there's much more to the price than just buying it from somebody. Obviously, something in this non-running state, it's worth anything from $100 to maybe tops $500, being a 15-year-old 150cc scooter. So hypothetically, say we bought it for $100. How much additional cost do you have involved? Considering you do it yourself or you bring it to a shop like my shop. So keep in mind, the first thing I covered was the registration. You want to figure out how much it's going to cost you to get this thing legal on the roads in your jurisdiction, area, state, country, varies state to state. California is a rather expensive state to keep a vehicle registered. It's going to be at minimum $150 to get this registered. Very, very minimum. If there's back registration fees, it could be as high as $1,000 or more, exceeding the value of the scooter. So you got to keep that in mind. Overhauling the carburetor, overhauling the front end, new tires, miscellaneous electrical parts such as the battery, the switches. If you're going to do this yourself, I would count on having $500 at minimum. Minimum. You don't know what you're going to come across. You may get lucky and only need to invest $300 or $500, and that would be a set of tires, a basic dry belt, and you're able to overhaul the carburetor. You have fuel line on the shelf, inexpensive fuel tap. And if you look in the description of this video, I'll put some of the very common parts that you put on a scooter like this. It's always good to have them on hand before you jump in a project. So you know, you're a couple $100 there, and that's great. If you can get into something like this, say somebody gives it to you for free, you got registration, it's very expensive, and you're on this scooter for $500. This is a great scooter once you get them running. They're super reliable. They're rock solid. You can get all the parts for them, made of metal. They just ride really nice. Even the suspension, I'm not even talking about the suspension being worn out, because typically it's pretty high quality suspension. They don't really get worn out until you're way up there in the miles. This thing's got really low miles. And that's the way you typically find these barn finds. Somebody ride it and thought it was a great idea when they bought the thing brand new, in 2002, but then they forgot about it by 2003 and it just sat on the side of the house. It's a sad reality of a lot of new scooters here in the United States, but if you're handy or you know the cost commitments to get something like this going, that's where you go with it. Say you don't want to get your hands dirty and get something like this going. You want something that's, you know, similar cosmetic shape. The market value of this scooter is, I would say you could find a good one as long as you know it's all solid. It's got a recent service history, $1,500 to $2,000 for an ET4. That's about what they go for now that they're 15 plus years old. Sometimes less if you're lucky. Say you were going to take this scooter to my shop and you want to refurbish it to the nth degree. I'm talking make it perfect, other than putting a paint job on it, which is quite a labor intensive task to do a professional paint job. But I want to take care of all this stuff. I would take all these cast parts off and get them powder coated, center stand, a muffler, refinish the muffler, put new tires on there. Probably just hypothetically, we got to put a new carburetor. I send it through my ultrasonic cleaner and it's just too far gone. Overhaul the whole front end, the switches. Well, just the fuel system service with a new battery, and fuel system service here would be all the lines get replaced, a new battery, drain the fuel tank, clean out the fuel tank, put a new fuel tap in, overhaul the carburetor. You're anywhere from $300 to $600 just for that one service. And that's like to get the motor running, and fortunately we already have keys here. To overhaul the front end, sometimes you may need a master cylinder. It may be degraded enough where the seals have fallen apart. Put new switches in there, drop the whole front end and grease it. That's pretty labor intensive. It'd take one of my guys like 2.5 hours to do that whole job. And with parts, you're a couple $100 into that. Powder coating, cosmetic stuff, another $200, $300, $400. A set of tires, good quality Michelin ones, a couple, you know, about 200 and some change to install a set of tires. A bell service, another $150. So you get where I'm going with this. And at that point, you'd be out the door from a reputable shop that's very confident, you know, somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500. The only good thing that you'd have out of that, minus the registration costs that you may incur, is you'd have the peace of mind that it's all been gone through by a professional shop. I hope that gives everybody an idea of the costs incurred when fixing up any older scooter that's an automatic versus buying something new. Obviously, new's a much larger commitment. You got the low end of the spectrum, you know, of a reputable, nice name brand scooter, probably at $3,000 all the way up to a top of line Sprint Sport loaded with accessories where you'd be over $6,000. You're obviously going to be less than that price point. You're not at a new scooter price point. Even if you do a serious fix up on the scooter, the value in fixing up, I hope you'd be doing it for yourself. It's not necessarily you fix it up to try to sell it because the value is just not quite there for something like this. But kind of gives everybody an idea where it's at with owning something like this. I hope that helped everybody out. Maybe it convinces you, I want to get a new scooter with ABS brakes and fuel injection and a 2-year warranty on it and just keep my hands clean. Or you're like me, this is the kind of stuff I buy for myself. I love the new stuff, don't get me wrong, and I love the vintage stuff. That's much, much older than this class of scooter, but I have a first year or second year ET4 in my own collection. That's from the late 90s. And I kind of went through all this on my own scooter, and that was, I like getting my hands dirty, even if it's on my own, even though I do it all the time with the scooters that come through our shop and along with my staff that works for me. Just a lot more to it than just putting a battery in it. Until next time, this is Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. If you're new to the channel, you just stumbled across this video, you're gonna find how-tos on everything for this. How to pull the wheels off, pull the carburetor and overhaul it, service the belt, everything I talked about in this video. There's prior videos I've done on doing each of those individual tasks if you're looking to tackle a fun project such as this. And of course at scooterwest.com, we got you covered. All those parts fortunately are in stock. That's the beauty of these Vespas. A lot of other brands, if it's 15 years old, good luck finding parts. I'll say the Hondas aren't too bad, but there's 15-year-old Honda. What are you gonna find? A Honda Elite 80 or a Reflex? And the much older Hondas, that's where it gets difficult to find the parts. Old Hondas and Yamahas, they're pretty cool, but difficult to keep going, especially with new parts to keep them reliable. Ride safe, Robot here.